Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective, and this week we're talking about a specific instance in someone's life where they were considered not committed enough to their group. So this week's topic has to do a little bit more with if you've had experience working in groups, which not all of us have, and even if we have, sometimes they've been different types of groups. So my view definitely comes from a specific place, as I'm sure everyone's will this week, which is the point of this channel. Hooray! You're giving us purpose with this question. Thank you. So this week's topic will be in the description of this video as usual, so you can read the whole thing. The basic idea is this person was in a working group of some kind. They referred to it as a circle and a couple other names. Sounded like it was meant to be a formal, somewhat like a coven situation, but what happened was they really didn't get to have a lot of say in the scheduling. So sometimes they would have to work and they couldn't make it, and they do not have children. So it seems like the idea is that a lot of the moms in the group who had kids got to have a lot of say in the scheduling because they had to work around their kids' schedules. So this person who had to work sometimes was considered not committed enough if they weren't able to make it, but everyone else was able to have all these different reasons that they couldn't make it, and they were not treated as though they were not being committed. It was just kind of allowed, like, okay. So this person ended up being kicked out of their group because of this, and even risked losing their job trying to get there, things like that. They're nervous about looking for a new group now and wanting to know our thoughts on this situation. So first of all, wow, I'm really sorry that you had to go through that. I'm really sorry that anyone ever has to go through something like that. Whether, like in this instance, it sounds like it was a women's only group, potentially, but whether it's a women's group, a men's group, a mixed group, a family group, whatever it is, this is just a really crappy situation, I have to say. That it's not something that I like to hear about people having to go through. Unfortunately, because every group is different and designed by the people who are in it, it really depends on the people that you've got putting a group together, what it's going to be like. And so if you've got a bunch of moms in a group together, they're all kind of aware of that, and they might all be understanding of each other because they're all in the same situation, they're all thinking of each other and each other's limitations. Whereas if you're in a group where nobody has kids, you're all thinking from that point of view. You're all working people, and so you are just thinking of going around that kind of thing. And I know that I have been a part of, I've only been a part of informal groups, but I've been a part of some groups where I was the only non-mother, and that was a little odd. And there have been times, I was going to say, I've had more experiences where most of the people involved don't have kids, or specifically if they do, they're not trying to bring their kids to the circle. And then there might be one mom who really needs to bring her kids, and so that always kind of threw us off because we realized, oh, we really weren't thinking of that. We weren't accommodating those people. And that's a challenge. So when you're someone who is looking to organize groups or create rituals for people, you have to really think about who you want to be able to participate in those spaces and really accommodate that. So I'm going off of my notes already. Let me get to my actual notes here. So the first thing I wrote down, I have a bulleted list here on my whiteboard so that I don't ramble forever, which I started off on a tangent, but I think that was a good point. Anyway, the first bullet point I wrote down was that I feel that this group that's being described here, again, we don't know any of these people. I don't know any of the situation from anyone else's viewpoint. I don't know any more details than what you have in the description there. But this kind of thing, I just feel like that's not really good behavior. That's not nice behavior. And groups that will treat their members like that, I feel, are not worth your time. They might be really excellent for the people who are in that group, but like I said, they just might not be thinking of or willing to accommodate other people, and for those other people, it may not be worth your time. And I want to say, don't worry, not all groups will be like that. By the virtue of the fact that every group is different, because all people are different, there will be another group out there. I don't know if there's another one in your town, in your city, or if you might find one, a couple years from now down the line. I don't know what the situation will be, but just knowing the diversity of what exists in the community, you can count on the fact that not all groups are going to do that. A lot of people who are really dedicated to creating inclusive spaces will be thinking about all of those different things. Or you may find a group somewhere that's mostly working people who don't have kids, and that just might be a better situation for you to be in at this time in your life because it suits your schedule better, whatever the case may be. So I've been in groups that wouldn't meet because the leader or facilitator couldn't make it. And that always really bugged me. I felt like there should be a backup plan. Just because the person who usually is in charge of everything comes down with the flu, that means 10 other people all of a sudden don't get their monthly meeting that they were really looking forward to. I feel like the leader should always be able to, if there is one specific leader, should always have kind of a VP, like a right-hand person, who they can call up and say, I'm really under the weather, I can't host this time, can you please, call around, maybe see if one of the other people can host, or we can go to their house, but can you lead ritual? Or even like, I've written down notes, can you do this? Especially if it's an established group where there's kind of a system, everybody kind of knows the order of things, and that would be something comfortable to do. That's very difficult to do if you don't teach anyone else what you're doing. But I always felt like there should be that backup plan, because specifically one of the groups that I'm thinking of that this happened to me in was a class that I was teaching through my UU church that I was actually one of 3 co-facilitators of that group. And whenever one or both of the other 2 people couldn't be there, they just canceled the class before even telling me. Whereas I was available, and if somebody else could have met me there to let me in, I could have run that class myself for that day and just said our other 2 facilitators can't be here today, but I know what the lesson is and I'll present this lesson to you. But instead there were a lot of issues with that, and so they would just cancel, and I always felt like that's not fair, because what ended up happening was a lot of the people who wanted to come, it kept being canceled, so they stopped coming, and then the group fell apart because of that. So I feel like there has to be a lot of scheduling, and that can be very difficult. Obviously, if you've ever tried to schedule a group of people before that all have different schedules, it can be difficult. I'm not saying that it's an easy thing to do, but I do think it's unfair if a lot of people get to have a say and some people just don't. That's just not a great situation. I can't tell anyone how to run their group. As I said, everybody's is going to be different. But I can tell you all, as people who might be seeking groups, that you're allowed to pick one that's right for you. Now, this might be different if you are looking to get into a group that requires initiation and things like that, because you might not know until you're in it for a while whether or not it's right for you. And by the time you're in it, people don't necessarily want to just let you leave and kind of hop around if they're showing you secret things or anything like that. But a lot of groups like that, at least my friend's group that is initiatory, they have kind of a training process, kind of a get to know the group process, see if this is right for you, so that you can do that kind of thing. I'm not someone who's looking for an initiatory tradition, but any kind of casual groups like that, even if you go to like some local group, local study group, whatever, some meetup group, things like that, feel free to look around at different places and say, I'm kind of feeling things out, I'm just looking to see what's right for me. I know it can be really hard if you really, really want something and there's not a lot of options to feel like you need to stay with that option because you want that connection and there really aren't other options available for you right now. If it's something like that where you just really don't feel heard, you really don't feel respected, you don't feel like they're treating you as part of the group, then you may be better off for a while just working by yourself. I think that groups, within the difficulty of how scheduling is, they either need to make sure that everyone can be there if they're the kind of group that wants everyone to be at every meeting. They need to ensure that that can happen, or they need to operate in a way where it's okay if not everybody shows up. That's mostly the stuff that I've been involved in, is where it's like, it's pretty open, there's kind of a core group of people that come, and maybe one time this person can't make it, but the next month they'll be there and somebody else can't make it. Sometimes everyone will be there, but it's acceptable if you can't make it because you always know when the next one's going to be and you'll try to make it that time. So sometimes they fluctuate. I was in a group that supposedly had like 20 members, but I went every single month for like 6 months and I only ever met 4 people, and one of them only came once. And for like the other 5 months, it was the same 3 people. It was like me and the leader of the group and one other person who came regularly, and supposedly there were all these other people, but they never showed up. So they had a rule that if you were at the current meeting, you got to help decide when the next one would be. But none of the other people were ever consulted. So if one date worked for the three of us, it's not that difficult to find one date that works for three people, but then we'd email everybody else and everybody else would not be available, so they wouldn't go or whatever. It's just not a good system. So I think it's very difficult to do, but I ended up not continuing to meet with that group because I didn't like that situation, and I didn't like being part of something that felt like there were a lot of people on the fringes who didn't really care a lot about it. But I think in that case, and in a lot of cases, you can tell when someone is trying really hard and just can't make it all the time, like this person in their story that they told us for this question this week. It seems like you were really trying and you just couldn't do it all the time. I think that you can tell the difference between someone who's really putting forth an effort and someone who is just like, like reads the email every month, but they're like, I won't try to show up, I won't even reply, I won't give any feedback, nothing. So I kind of understand why they stopped trying to have everybody weigh in, because so many people were just like, they just didn't care. I also think that emergencies come up, even if you want everybody to be there, if last minute someone gets sick or someone's kid has an accident, you have to go to the hospital, somebody comes down with food poisoning, last minute we forgot, we have to go see Granny, whatever the case may be. Last minute things happen, people forget things, emergencies happen, that should be something that people just know as people. But I feel like it should not be treated differently if it's work causing you to miss it versus your kids causing you to miss it. So I feel like in this particular example, that just speaks a lot to that group's priorities and what they considered a valid excuse versus an invalid excuse. For example, I'm a stage manager. Part of my job when I work on shows at my theater is keeping track of everybody who's going to be there, and at the beginning of the shows, when you audition, and then right at the beginning, we ask you for your conflicts list. Any days that we would normally have rehearsal, we give you the general time, it's Sundays through Thursdays, this time to this time. You get Fridays and Saturdays off until we get to Tech Week. And I ask you, in that range of dates, on those days at that time, do you have any conflicts and days that you can't be there? People tell me that in advance, I put it on a calendar, so every night, if somebody's not here, I look, I see, okay, I knew they weren't going to be here, cool, that was already accepted. If people keep giving me conflicts throughout the rehearsal process, those are considered like unexcused absences in school. So there was a show that I was doing a while ago where I kept getting a lot of unexcused absences that I couldn't do anything about because it was a kid's show. I can't very well argue with the parents and be like, no, you have to bring your kid here. They're paying for it. So if they paid for it and they're choosing to keep their kid out, your kid's the one who's gonna look silly on stage if they haven't learned their stuff, and it makes everyone else look bad, so it's really not fair. But anyway, there's not a lot of arguing I can do with them. I just kind of had to be like, okay, but I considered them unexcused. And this was things like, if somebody called me and said, my child is very sick, this was the middle of winter or whatever, my child is very sick, they can't make it, I will make them run lines at home, I'm so sorry, you can't help that, that's fine. Versus someone who said, my kids won't be at rehearsal tomorrow because at the last minute, my brother-in-law got them tickets to the amusement park, so I'm going to take them to the amusement park for the whole day instead, so they won't be there. And it was like a day that we were counting on having those kids because we were doing a lot of work that revolves around them because they had big parts. And it's like, okay, you just ruined things for everybody for a not real excuse. Like when you're in a show, when you're committed to something, you should say that comes first. So what you should have said was, no, I'm sorry, we can't go that day. How about another day when we don't have rehearsal? This is an actual example of what happened to me. I didn't see those kids for the next couple of days because they spent time out, I guess it was a water park, and they got sick from playing in the water, and they were sick for 2 days. So I didn't have two of my main people for 3 days because of an invalid excuse because someone's priorities were messed up. Okay? So I think there are things that can be considered valid versus invalid excuses. I think if you have a work schedule that you know about and you communicate that to people, I think that should be considered a valid excuse. I could see if last minute you decided to pick up an extra shift and it was whatever. But still, I feel like I've mostly been in groups where it's not mandated that you're at every single meeting because it wasn't a specific coven. It's more informal. So I can't really speak to that. I can't speak to how that would be treated. But anyway, I hope that theater tangent analogy helped you understand a bit of how I feel about that. But any of those things, I feel like that doesn't mean you kick someone out. We worked around not having those kids for 3 days. It was difficult after, but they realized that and they had to work extra hard and they got there. That's fine. The only times we've ever, kicked someone out of a show was if they disappeared from the face of the earth and stopped coming and stopped communicating. Then we were just like, okay, I guess you're not in the show anymore. I guess we'll just replace you because you're not even talking to us. That kind of thing happens. That doesn't sound like what this week's questioner was doing. My last 2 bullet points I kind of already said. You can tell when somebody is really trying and just not able to always make it work versus when someone is really not trying and not giving it any effort. And I've only been in informal groups, so I can't really speak to how it works in very formal groups. If I had thought about this in advance before I had to make this video on the day before it's being put up, I would have contacted my friend who is the high priestess of a coven and asked how it works in their situation. But I know that things that I've planned with them, it's very much like, okay, well, let's pick a couple of different dates and see which date most people can make it on. But I think they also have a set schedule where everyone kind of expects when it's going to be. It would be the Saturday closest to the full moon or the 3rd Saturday or whatever it is. People come up with a specific schedule so everyone's expecting it so you can plan work and other things around that. And then if you find out in advance, oh, I'm gonna have tickets to a basketball game that night, you can tell that person as soon as you know, and then they'll say, okay, you're not gonna be there that night, I know that in advance, cool. This is why I'm a good stage manager, because I'm all about communicating with people when you're going to be able to do things and when you're not. But it's ironic because I'm also horrible at planning really far in advance because I know that tendency for schedules to be weird. So I can't commit to anything really far down the road. But I love when things are regular. We're gonna do this the 2nd Friday of every month, or we're gonna do this the weekend closest to the full moon every month. Then you can always look at a calendar and always be like, okay, I can't make it now, but I can make it next time. And if I run into a situation where it feels like other people aren't taking it seriously, I usually leave. I usually find something else because there's going to be something else better, and I'm not going to waste my time and energy on something that I'm really putting a lot into that other people really aren't. So I want you all to know that you have the power to do that as well. I know that situations are different, especially if you're talking about a specific coven where you've been initiated or anything like that, or a grove or anything similar to that. But just in a general sense, if you are a person seeking groups, remember that you are allowed to choose. And if something ends up not really being right for you, you can go and look for something that is. And if you're someone who is leading a group, I do think it's very difficult to schedule and things like that. I think that communicating openly about that difficulty is very important. I think communicating honestly about things is really important in general, but also especially when you're doing something like this. And just try to remain cognizant of different people's needs for scheduling and what kind of people do you want to have in your group? What kind of people do you want this group to be open to? If you're not going to allow children, then will there be provided childcare so that people can bring their kids and leave them with someone else on site while they work? Or are the kids going to be allowed to participate in whatever you're doing? Or will that person have to find a babysitter or leave their kids at home, which may or may not really affect whether or not they decide to come to your group's meeting. Things like that are really important. What about work? Are there times when you could meet alternating Saturday one time, Sunday the other time for people who work every other weekend or every weekend and maybe they have one or the other of those days off at different times? Can you occasionally meet on a Sunday afternoon and a Friday night so that people who have evenings versus afternoons free might be able to make some adjustments there? So think about the kind of people that you want to have involved. And also for the seekers, this goes for you too. Think about the kinds of people that you want to be involved with and find groups that are really geared toward that. Or if you're creating it, create your group and your schedule with that in mind. I didn't know that this was going to be a video about me talking about group creation and leadership, but that's what it ended up being, so I hope that that's useful to some of you. And yeah, I'm just really sorry that this situation happened. I have a lot of feelings about it, and I know that I can never know the situation fully and that it will be different for everyone, which is in a lot of ways a great thing. There's always going to be something different. Thank you very much for watching. Next week is subs week, so you will not see me on this channel, but you will see me on my personal channel, CuteWitch772, all of the time. And I'm doing a lot of exciting stuff in my life right now, so please go and check that out if you're interested in what I'm doing. Keep up on any new exciting updates. And I will see you back here on Pagan Perspective next month. Until next time, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.